Back with today's Read Aloud, we're in chapter 24. It's called Breakthrough, and we're with Scarlett Johns. Scarlett Johns followed the robed form of the skeleton down the dank and dimly lit corridor. Ahead of the skeleton was a guard who walked quickly, not looking back. He had briefly glimpsed what remained of the skeleton's face and did not want to see it again. From somewhere close came the rumble, screech, and clank of a train. The corridor was narrow and claustrophobic. The air was stale, as if it already breathed too many times to be of any use. The only light came from a string of widely spaced, flickering light bulbs hung from a wire that snaked along the tunnel wall. It was cold down here, 80 feet below the London streets. Muddy water dripped constantly from the earthen walls and ceilings, held up by what looked like hastily built wooden braces. They passed a cell to the left, and the skeleton ignored it, but Scarlett paused to peer through the barred window. She saw a figure huddled in a corner, wrapped in filthy clothes. The figure looked up, and Scarlett, expecting to see a male prisoner, inhaled sharply. It was a woman, kept in a cage that a dog didn't deserve. The woman's dirt-streaked face was gaunt and pale, but still quite beautiful, and her eyes shone with both defiance and fear. The woman's gaze held Scarlett's for a moment, and with an abrupt turn of her head, Scarlett looked away. She resumed following the skeleton. She did not want to think about the woman. In another dozen yards, the tunnel widened into a space that was apparently being used as an office of sorts. A table had been improvised from wooden planks, and on it sat a flickering lantern and a jumble of large sheets of paper that appeared to be architectural drawings. "Wait here," said the guard, keeping his eyes averted from the skeleton, and he left quickly. The skeleton and Scarlett waited in silence. Scarlett, restless, looked down the corridor every few seconds. The skeleton stood utterly still, his face obscured by the hood of his long robe. 5 long minutes passed. Suddenly, the skeleton rasped, "He's coming." Scarlett looked down the corridor. She saw nothing. She was about to speak, but that's when she felt something. The air, already cold, was growing colder. And now we shift scenes over to with Molly. Molly could feel the cold too. She was standing next to her cell window, and her face was pressed against the bars, looking to her left, trying to get another glimpse of the 2 strangers who had just been led past by the guard. There was a hooded man and a woman who had stopped to look in at her. She felt the chill and turned to look at her. She could see only a few feet down the corridor. She heard footsteps approaching. The air grew colder still, and the footsteps grew closer. And that's when Molly screamed. She didn't mean to scream, but she couldn't stop herself. It was as if the past 20 years hadn't happened, and she was all of a sudden a girl again, trapped in her room while this hideous shadow creature thing seeped under her door, coming for her. She felt the same chill that night as she felt now, and the horror came back, overpowering her thoughts. She clapped her hand over her mouth, forcing herself to be quiet. She backed quickly away from the cell window, with the dark shape appearing outside. The footsteps stopped, and Molly didn't want to look at the window, but she also couldn't look away. Her hand still to her mouth, she watched as the tall, dark figure in dark clothing and a top hat stepped toward the cell and bent to look inside. A face appeared at the window. It was impossibly pale. The lips were thin and bloodless. The eyes were hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses with lenses black as coal. Molly had seen von Schotten once before at a banquet. He had looked strange then, but down here in the gloom of the tunnel, he looked inhuman. He was silent for a few seconds, staring at Molly. She didn't breathe. "Greetings, star catcher," he sneered. His voice was different from the one he had used at the banquet. Now it sounded like the moan from a tomb. Molly knew this voice well. Somehow she found words of her own. What do you want?" she said. A pause, then the hideous voice answered, "What we have always wanted." Molly started to speak again, but von Schotten was gone, and Molly sank onto the hard wooden planks that served as her bed. She was grateful that von Schotten, or Ambra, or whatever this creature was, had not come into her cell. But his words filled her with despair. What we have always wanted. Now we're back with Scarlett. Scarlett watched the tall, thin man with the dark eyeglasses as he approached the table. The skeleton had told her to speak to von Schotten only if spoken to, so she offered no greeting. Von Schotten ignored her, addressing his words to the skeleton. "Give it to me." From somewhere in his robe, the skeleton produced a bundled rag with a string of rawhide, holding it tight. With the gnarled nub of his right hand, he set it on the table. What do you think is going to be in that wrapped up rag? You guessed it. The tip of Cortana, as promised, said the skeleton. Von Schotten looked unafraid at the hideous face of the skeleton, then down at the bundle. He reached down and untied it with quick motions of his long, bony fingers. The cloth came away, and he picked up the piece of metal which seemed to glow in the lantern light. Be thinking about why it might glow. Von Schotten's bloodless lips twitched in what might have been an attempt at a smile. He turned to the skeleton. Where was it? The cathedral at Aachen, rasped the skeleton. It was in a stained glass window, disguised as a bishop's mitre, in plain view all these years. You have done well, both of you. He turned in Scarlet's direction, and a sense of dread overcame her. She felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. She was greatly relieved when Von Schotten, distracted by the arrival of one of the guards who came puffing down the hallway from the direction opposite the way Scarlet and the skeleton had arrived. Baron Von Schotten, said the guard as he reached the table. We have... But he stopped, seeing the skeleton's face. Out with it, snapped Von Schotten. Yes, Baron. You said to inform you when the prisoners have broken through. We believe they have. Stop the digging immediately. I will be there shortly. Yes, Baron, said the guard, and he scurried back down the corridor. Von Schotten turned to the skeleton, and once again thin lips writhed into a ghastly smile. It appears you have arrived at an opportune time. You bring the tip of Cortana, and now we appear to have broken through to the chamber. That gives me 2 legs of the tripod. We now only need the 3rd piece, and we shall soon have that, thanks to a friend in the palace. Still, said the skeleton, you run the risk of discovery here, so close to the underground. We are well hidden. We are protected by powerful friends in the police force. No one knows what we are doing here except, of course, the guards, who are well aware that their lives are worthless if they betray us. What about the prisoners? We will not need them much longer, said Von Schotten. When their usefulness expires, they will be eliminated. Maybe you allow me to carry out that task, said the skeleton. You would enjoy that, wouldn't you? Yes, said the skeleton, and Scarlet shivered for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. Very well, when their work here is done, they will be yours. Now let us observe as they finish digging their graves. Von Schotten and the skeleton started down the hallway. Behind them, Scarlet hesitated. She had been promised a great deal of money for her expertise, which had been critical in finding the tip of Cortana. But now that the tip was found, had her usefulness also expired? She thought about that woman in the cell, and suddenly she was seized by the urge to run, to forget about the money and get out of this underground. Could she escape? Would she be able to get past the guards? And even if she did, would they... Scarlet! The angry rasp of the skeleton's voice jolted her back to the moment. She saw that Von Schotten and the skeleton had stopped and were looking back at her. Are you coming? Rasped the skeleton. Scarlet half turned toward the exit of the corridor, her body tensed on the edge of running. But she couldn't get past the edge. She sagged, then slowly turned and began walking towards the 2 dark figures. Yes, she said quietly. I'm coming. Molly had heard every word. A trick of acoustics carried the sound perfectly to her cell. She had listened with increasing sadness to Von Schotten's conversation with the 2 visitors. Now, as they walked away, she tried to piece together the meaning of what she had overheard. The strangers had brought Von Schotten the tip of something, the name of which Molly didn't know. But she recognized the name of the city it had been found in, Aachen. That triggered a memory in Molly. James said he had overheard Von Schotten talking about a missing piece that had something to do with Germany. Aachen was in Germany, Molly knew that much, and apparently the strangers had brought Von Schotten the missing piece. Whatever it was one of 3 things Von Schotten needed. Apparently, he had a chamber close by. That must be what James, Thomas, and the other prisoners had been digging for. But the 3rd piece, Molly had no idea what that would be, other than Von Schotten expected to have it soon. Now, if you're sharp, you know what the 3rd piece is. And if you know it, send me a message like Josiah did. You responded with my answer on what an abalone was and what brazen meant. So if you think you know what the third piece is, we have the tip, we have the chamber, third piece. But we're going to finish up the chapter. That was bad enough. Much worse was the discussion about the fate of the prisoners. When their usefulness expires, von Schatten had said, they will be eliminated. Molly wondered how soon that would be. Tomorrow? Today? In the next hour? She looked through the cell window. She had done this 1,000 times, but she focused her attention on the wooden supports in the tunnel. Her gaze went to the boards that formed her cell floor. She went to the wall of her ceiling and dug her fingers into the dirt. She grunted and pulled with all of her strength, and with a sound, the end of the board came up. Spiders and centipedes, disturbed by the board, began moving, scurrying across the mud, and Molly jumped back. The board was oak, thick and sturdy. Molly again moved to the door and examined the tunnel supports outside her cell. They appeared to have been constructed hastily for temporary use. She looked down again at the loose floorboard, then at the steel bars across the cell window. Molly looked both ways down the corridor. She saw nobody. She lifted the floorboard, slipped it in quietly through the bars, and went to work. That's the end of the chapter. So there's a lot of questions there. Number one, what do you think Molly is going to be doing with that board in her cell? Why is she pulling it out and bringing it in to work with the dirt? Second question involves Scarlet and the skeleton. Okay, Scarlet is that type of character that's on the villain side, but you get the sense that she's not all bad. And a lot of characters will be like that. Some good, some bad in them. So I'm wondering if you can connect Scarlet with any other character in our book that might be a villain, but we get a feeling that they're really not actually such a bad person after all. So if you know who that person is and connect them to Scarlet, let me know. And then the third thing is the skeleton. We've talked about the possibility of the skeleton being Slank. In this chapter, it seems like Slank is very eager to get a hold of the prisoners that are digging for the cell. And do you think that proves that he's definitely Slank or disproves? I feel like it definitely provides some evidence either way. So I'll be back tomorrow with the next chapter. Hope you're enjoying the read aloud. And yeah, stay safe.